So welcome to Roadmap, Autotrader UK's product and tech podcast. Can't even get my teeth are stuck today. So today we're going totally, literally off piste. And I've actually got no idea how we've got here today. But through the magic of connections, we managed to get Jacey Normand to pop in and talk all things in her world. So whether that be undercover for BBC reports, proud business leader in the Northwest, or rubbing shoulders with the likes of Kevin Sinfield. Either way, Jacey, welcome to Autotrader. And yeah, just how did you end up here on the couch today?
It's a good question. I often ask myself that, after nights out. It came through a mutual connection that we both have, who works for Autotrader. And it's that, and you have that, is it 7 or 6 degrees of separation?
Yeah.
It felt a little bit like that someone that works very closely with my partner, who is also married to somebody who works for Autotrader. So made the introduction and here I am.
Yeah. So was it, did you think we'll be driving around in a car like Rory Reid
Slightly
style?
Disappointing, actually. I've got to be honest. When you told me I was doing an Autotrader podcast, I felt like I was going to come onto the set of Top Gear. I thought it was going to be you and I in a Porsche, driving around in a posh 4x4 somewhere in Cheshire.
This is where I'd love to get a bit of funding to do that.
Need some investment in this podcast.
Yeah. I think this is that. I need to stop doing it as a side of desk, but then I get cancelled quite quickly. So one of the things we chatted the other day that I was fascinating, because one of the things we started talking about is the Northwest and like your deep roots in the Northwest. Like Autotraders, like we're in the Northwest and we're going deeper in terms of our roots. So like, when you meet people outside in the industry, like what does the Northwest like mean to you, and how does it fit into your whole professional and personal life?
Well, I've always remained in the northwest of England. I'm born and bred in Manchester, and even though I have had stints in my life where I've lived in other places, I had a really crazy stint in my life where I lived in the USA, working for a congressman for a brief period of time after I finished my degree. And I worked in London. I went and worked for an MP in the Houses of Commons when I was 18. I got an internship and I went off and worked for an MP, and it was absolutely terrifying. I had a gap year before I went to university. And I just thought, you know what, why can't I give this a go? This is really exciting. And so I decided to take myself off there. Yeah. And then went to uni, did my politics degree, absolutely loved it, but thought, you know what, I want another experience that's a little bit like that experience. It was almost the most out of my comfort zone I could possibly imagine being, at the age of 18, having never lived away from home, and then being given the opportunity to go and work in Westminster is just surreal. So I had to take that. And then after my degree, I was really looking for something else that would replicate that experience. And so I applied for an internship with the English Speaking Union. And at that time, they only used to take 10 or 11 people from England across to the United States every year. Went for this interview down in London. I don't know where this self-belief came from, because I came from, a very modest background, working class family. They always supported me, but I was not born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I just think when I was younger, I just didn't see boundaries or limits. I used to kind of think, oh, that'd be cool to be an MP. I wonder how you do that. Maybe I'll go and work in Parliament for a bit. Or I've watched a bit of The West Wing, actually. I quite fancy going down to the House of Representatives.
I like that. I watched The West Wing. I'm now totally informed and know what I'm doing.
And that was kind of how it happened. I thought, well, that's a bit similar to working in the House of Commons. And then I got there and I just realised that, everybody that was on the internship with me was from Oxford and Cambridge. I'd gone to Liverpool Uni. I'd done okay there.
I went to Liverpool Uni.
Did you? We've got so many parallels in our lives. It's astounding, isn't it? North Manchester roots, going to Liverpool Uni, all the other things. Yeah. But that was really strange, because, and I don't mind sharing this story now, because, you asked me what the Northwest means to me, and I think you've got to have a sense of humour to live here. And for about 4 months when I was out in Washington working with loads of American people who couldn't completely understand my accent, and also lots of people from Oxford and Cambridge who did speak very differently from me, I realised that I started to change my accent a little bit. Yeah. So I'd phone home and it was almost like I had these two personas. I suddenly slipped back into, right, Mom, how are you doing? Yeah. But then I'd be like, oh, so what's happening tonight? Because nobody could understand me when I spoke in my actual accent. And it all culminated in one evening out with all the interns where somebody said, you really remind me, you really sound like somebody very famous. And in my head, you never know where that's going to go, do you? When somebody says it's either going to be positive or negative. Yeah. it was Daphne from Frasier. So very disappointing for me. I was absolutely gutted. And at that point, I thought, why am I trying to even soften my accent? Let's just go with it. It's who I am.
So did you go
part
with
of my
like
identity.
a really like posh British accent, or did you start going a bit American?
So I'd say a bit transatlantic.
Yeah.
I didn't actually intentionally try to disguise my accent. But what happens is when you live in another country, and even in the United States, that you do soften your accent a little bit because people can't understand you if you just talk the way that you'd be talking to another Manx. So if you're doing that 24/7, eventually I can see why people's accents start to change, because if I was there for more than 6 months, my accent probably would have started to change on a more permanent basis. But luckily for me, I was only there for 4 months and I got offered to stay working out for ITV. I turned it down because I always wanted to come back home. And I had this weird feeling that if I decided to take an opportunity that came my way from ITN News, I would never come home. I might meet somebody in America. I might root in America. And I knew that ultimately I wanted to come back home. I'm close to my mum and dad. I'm close to my family. It wasn't just necessarily about staying in the Northwest, but it was about, you know, ultimately not wanting to live in a completely different country. And I think that's a bit, my personality is a bit like that. I like to dip in and out of things, but ultimately I like to have roots.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. My sister lives in the States. So she went to Liverpool Uni as well. And she went over and she's been there 20 years. So she has this one persona and accent, which is very American. She's got kids and that. But still, when she comes home, it's like, I can see when she's with the kids, she flips straight back into like cup of tea.
Yeah.
And I can see her kids go, what the hell is going on with
Yeah.
them? But she's similar in terms of that thing you talked about. She's always wanted to come back. But obviously once she laid down roots and had kids, I think it's a lot more difficult. So you're in the States at Washington. So then did you come back into the Northwest, or was it back into London?
So I moved back home after working in the United States, and that was a really strange time because I'd had the most remarkable experience out in Washington. I mean, I even ended up at the presidential picnic. I met President Clinton. We were like celebrities in Washington DC. Me and a really good friend of mine who really gelled and connected out there. Doors opened everywhere for us, and we got taken to absolutely every remarkable event. Epic. It was unbelievable. We even went to the presidential inauguration. I won't tell you for which president because it'll tell you exactly how old I am. But we went to inaugurational balls. It was unbelievable. So when I came home, I had another one of those moments where I thought, right, what am I going to do now? Yeah. Well, actually, when I'd been in Washington, I'd watched James Mates doing some reporting into the ITN News. Yeah. And it really amused me that he had this great life in Washington, DC. And it was quite a chilled life. But then, you know, he'd do his live broadcasts and he'd have his really smart suit on, and lots of the correspondents would wear shorts because obviously you'd only see them from the waist up. And I remember them thinking, that looks like a really cool job as well. I quite fancy that. I'd quite like to be a reporter, actually. And then I thought, how am I going to make that happen? Who do I know at the BBC? And then when people say you've just got to knock on doors and not take no for an answer, I think I had that confidence when I was much younger where I just didn't see any inhibitants on what I was able to do. I didn't see any barriers. I just used to think, well, why can't I do that? Yeah. And it's remarkable how far that can take you. Because it did. It then landed me a job as a researcher at the BBC. And the next minute I was being asked, did I want to go and do a report for them? And at that point I was like, the imposter syndrome was absolutely huge. Yeah. But again, I said, all right then. Yeah.
I mean, it's funny because we did talk about this. All right then. Yeah, I'll give it a go. Where one side is going, yeah. And the other side is going, what am I doing?
Yeah, what the hell? And it was a bit like, you know, have you watched Bridget Jones when she becomes a reporter? I felt a little bit like that. I had to do a report, and I'll always remember it. Hopefully the rushes are no longer available and have been buried when the BBC moved from Oxford Road to where it now is at Media City. But I had to do this piece to camera on the runway 2 at Manchester Airport, which was also really surreal because when I'd worked in Parliament, I'd worked for an MP that campaigned long and hard to get the second runway. So then there I was standing on the second runway, about to deliver my very first piece to camera at the exact moment that a plane had to like fly over my head. So it was like I had to be cued in, deliver the lines. It had to be word perfect. There was only 1 or 2 chances to get it right, you know, because it had to be exactly as the plane was in a certain position in the sky. And I'll never forget just the buzz that I felt when I got those lines right and I did that piece to camera. I mean, it was probably the worst piece to camera I've ever done. I'd hate to see it back now because I must have looked about 12, because that's the other thing that was quite amusing. So I always looked so much younger than I actually was. So, you know, I might have been 22, but I would have looked about 15 or 16, more like I should have been on Newsround. But there I was again, in another world, stood on the runway at Manchester to do my very first piece to camera, and then the rest is history.
So is that like one of your, like, you know, like sort of life principles, whatever, but like rolling with the opportunities when they come? Because it sounds like even in that early formative professional time, those seem like some big things down in London, working MP, over to Washington, and then straight into the BBC.
Yeah, I think there is I definitely feel some sort of sadistic pleasure when it comes to being out of my comfort zone, feeling like I don't know if I'm going to be able to do something, and then overcoming that challenge and delivering it. That for me is something that, when I think about it, and I'd never really thought about it in that way before, consistently throughout my entire career, I seem to have been in situations where I've been inside thinking, I know if I can do this, but there's the visual side of me is saying, I definitely can do this. No problem at all. And inside I'm probably dying a slow, painful death, but that's part of the buzz of being able to deliver it and to achieve it, is overcoming those nerves and almost proving to yourself, actually, I could do that. Yeah. Because there's a real confidence boost in that, isn't there?
Yeah. And have you found that has like continued through your professional career? Because you said like back when I was younger, I had no fear, or has things changed as you got further through your career?
I mean, to say I don't have fear is a lie. I mean, it's how I always say, because some of the work I do now is coaching people to be great public speakers. I really, really enjoy that now. Not only do I still do all the presentation and broadcasting stuff, but I actually get to support really senior leaders in business and elite sports people to be brilliant speakers. And I understand what those nerves are like, because I've lent into those nerves in my entire career. I don't believe anybody that says that they do a live television broadcast or they stand in front of an audience of 1,000 people and don't feel any nerves. Part of the thrill of those situations is being able to harness those nerves and turn them into a positive to fuel the performance rather than hamper it. And it's that fight or flight mode. And somewhere I'm wired to enjoy sitting in that space.
We had our annual conference a little bit ago, and we were doing the opening bit, and it was that total bit where someone said, will you do something? I'm like, yeah. And then I think it was about 7 minutes beforehand, they said, you need to sit on the front row ready to go on. And it was like the amount of adrenaline or whatever and nerves, everything running through. But then they give you this tap on the shoulder, like, you need to go up there. But then it's that bit where you go into like totally different mode.
A different zone almost. You have to step into a different
zone. So I've not experienced anything like that really until very recently. And I'm fascinated by that bit where you say you like really lean into it. But the fact is, if you're not nervous, it's probably not the right thing. It's
interesting to see how far you can push yourself when you're in that space, I think. I think it's a real test of character, isn't it? You know, it's nerves at their highest level. You've almost got to kind of be able to be unflappable in those situations. I have to say, thinking about nerves and leaning into nerves, probably one of the most nervous I've ever felt in my career is when I used to have to read the news for the BBC. Because when I used to do North West Tonight,
so that's where, when we were talking, I'm thinking I'm going back to being, you know, in my house watching, as you used to, BBC North West and that.
But that, do you know what was nerve-wracking about that? For me personally, and I know that lots of other presenters may not have the same experience as me, but I'm not a very technical person. And what viewers at home probably don't realise is that when you do the bulletin, you have to edit it and put it together yourself. So it wasn't the presentation side of it that was nerve-wracking. It was the fact that I had to do all the other stuff. You know, that was really out of my comfort zone for me. I did try and I did it and I achieved it. And I was glad when I moved on to another job, because I did not enjoy the editing side. I'm actually okay at editing now. But at the time it was, you know, I was from an old school of presentation, I suppose, where it wasn't something that you were taught. It was something that you had to learn on the job. And that involved a lot of jeopardy for me,
Yeah.
having to cut it and edit it all together when you were on your own and it's just you and a director in the studio and that news is going out in front of hundreds of thousands of people and you're even doing your own auto cue. I mean, I actually joked to somebody at the time saying, why don't I just play the theme tune on a piano as well? see if I can do that. And I'm pretty confident that
like
would have been allowed if it was
like
possible.
a Peter Kay sketch. Yeah.
Yeah, so that was quite scary. But funnily enough, the presentation side of it was the least stressful part of that job. It was just being responsible for all that other stuff.
Yeah.
As well.
And when did like we talked about like today, when you were doing the BBC News, did you have an aspiration to be where you are today? Or was that something that has just, again, change and iterations and opportunities have popped up that you just grabbed?
I think I was, do you know what's really interesting? I was never a goal setter until I left the BBC. It's really strange for me to say that now because I've set loads of goals for myself since being part of Be The Standard. One of the things that I do most regularly and I'm most proud of is a group called Be The Standard that I host with Kevin Sinfield, Jamie Jones-Buchanan and Paul Cheetham-Carsh. And together we've created something that I think is remarkable. It's a high performance leadership club. Yeah. We work with some of the most remarkable leaders from across the country. And I'm really proud of that. And I just think that since being in that group and working with people that are from an elite sport background and from very successful businesses, I've started to realise that the way to achieve is to set your standards at a certain level and have things that you really want to achieve and have goals and hold yourself to account for those goals. But when I was at the BBC, that was not really a mindset that I had. Yeah. I had a very different mindset. I think it was more about, I'd love to present the news. Can I do that? Let's see how I'm going to do that and learn how to do that. Let's get out doing some reporting. Let's do some live reporting. Let's do an insert into a studio, see how that goes. Now let me see if I can actually hold the programme together. It almost developed along that trajectory. Whereas since I've left the BBC, I had to set goals because, I was at a real crossroads in my life. The one thing I've always known is I have had a great career in broadcasting. I loved being on television and I still love doing bits of telly now, but I didn't want it to define me. And I always knew that at some point I had to do something else. Yeah. Because I am in my 40s now. Should probably lie about my age, but I am, let's be honest. It's something to be proud of. It's something to be embraced. And I do think TV is a very cruel industry in the sense that, particularly on women, you feel that this pressure not to be able to age gracefully. And I didn't want to go down that route. I'm a mum with 2 young daughters. I felt like I had another career in me. Yeah. And so when I left, I gave myself 6 months off and I did do some presenting in that time, but really it was just coming out of the back of lockdown. So I hadn't done a lot of presentation in that time. I'd kind of had a bit of a break from it all. And I realised that I had to have redefine myself a little bit because once I left the BBC, I didn't want to just be known as Jacey from the BBC. And that's all I'd ever been known as. You go to a dinner and your placemat is set with BBC under it. And for a while, one of the things I found hardest was that, I'd go and do an awards ceremony and have my name there and have nothing under it. And I'd just think, I'm a no one now. Nobody knows who I am. I'm just Jacey Normand, who is that without the badge of the BBC? So then I started realising that I needed something else for me. I needed to craft something and I had to really find myself again. It was almost like being in a breakup of a relationship, where you only know yourself as being in that relationship and all of a sudden you're single and you have to think, who am I? And I went through that process and it wasn't an easy process. It's taken me a good 18 months to 2 years to be really taught with clarity about what I do now because you have to go along that journey. You don't just instantly find yourself.
And do you find that, because obviously that sounds like a big change, have you found that change and adaptation since is easier since you've done that major shift?
Do you know, I don't think change is ever easy. I think change should always be challenging. And that's part of the thrill of change, isn't it? Again, it's that leaning out of your comfort zone and leaning into the discomfort. I think just because something feels stressful and it's like stepping into the unknown doesn't mean the outcome's not going to be positive. And that's one big thing that I've really learned to actually be okay about, that to accept that, to sit with that, acknowledge it, and then to calmly redefine what it is that I want to achieve in whatever that is.
And because I find it fascinating, I was looking at the Be The Standard last night and different things, and I think there was something like better people make better leaders. So when did Be The Standard come into your life or your professional life?
So Be The Standard, it's so funny, the transition between the BBC and Be The Standard, it was almost within 2 weeks of deciding to leave the BBC. I got a call from Paul Cheetham and he said to me, do you fancy... I'd sat with Paul at a dinner in Liverpool. I'd hosted this Women in Business event for Downtown in Business and sat with Paul at a dinner and we got on really well. And he was telling me about his remarkable business because their business is remarkable, Sedulo. And he said, do you fancy coming and presenting the first one? It's with Kev Sinfield. Yeah. And I was like, really? Yeah, I'll do that. And that was it. And we did the first one. And I wasn't ever sure whether it was just going to be a one-off event or it was going to grow into something. And I think what was magical about that group is it because everybody had been in lockdown and businesses hadn't been interacting, suddenly we created this really special group of people that were phenomenal business leaders that had all gone through lockdown and all the challenges that that posed to business. Yeah. And suddenly they were in a room with, you know, like-minded peers and, you know, not only were they developing this remarkable network, we were also giving them access to world-class speakers in business and sport. And it was inspirational for them. You know, we've had people like Sugar Ray Leonard come in, Karen Brady, Gary Neville, Stephen Gerrard, Ricky Hatton. We've had Fred Doan, you know, the mixture of people. We've had Al Barrett, who's the founder of Grenade. You know, he's got Richard Branson on speed dial. He goes to Necker Island. You know, we've had amazing people in that room. And for that reason, I just think when you spend time in a group of leaders like that, and it mixes people like Kev and Paul and Jamie, you are going to be different as a person. Because, you know, it's that sometimes, I mean, I love to train. I've always exercised my entire life. But, you know, I like a run. But, you know, if it's raining, I'm not getting my trainers on. I don't want to do that. But since working with Kev, I bet Kev would go for a run in the rain. Of course he would. Yeah. And I'll get my trainers on and off I'll go.
Yeah. Because it's interesting because like, I was thinking about this before, like inspiration where maybe it's not that overt inspiration where you go looking for it, but then you meet people and they just being alongside them that sort of rubs off or you get the inspiration. Yeah. Because that's interesting with the, like, would Kevin do it? Like in terms of going out for the run?
And you know the answer would be yes.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, I see the videos when obviously doing the marathons. It's insane.
Just insane. And I think it's hard then to find your excuse of the why not.
Yeah.
And that's been really important for me. Yeah. Why not? You know, why not?
Yeah. And so the thing that caught me in terms of when I was scanning through was the better people make better leaders.
Yeah.
Because we're doing a big piece around people management in AT. And it's really interesting around that, like trying to be your authentic self, but being the best of yourself. And CEO was giving a bit of a talk at the conference around saying, you know, when things are tough is sometimes telling the story of what you're doing really well and be able to inspire your colleagues and things like that. So where did that better people, better leaders come from? Was that straight from the beginning or something?
It was straight from the beginning. It was because what was recognised quite early on by the likes of Paul and by Kev was just how much business could learn from elite sport. You know, when you look at the practice, the preparation and the performance side of sport, so much goes into the practice and preparation. The performance is a small part of what they do. Yeah. And we wanted to be able to replicate those support structures that for business leaders, you know, give them access to some of the best leaders in business and sport, find out what makes them tick, give them the secrets of their success and allow them to build on those principles and take things back to their own families and their own businesses that they could incorporate that would make them not just better leaders, but happier, healthier leaders. I think that was a big part of it as well. Because quite often in business, it can feel that you're out there on your own with no support. You make very high pressured decisions, unsupported, with no sounding boards. And that's something that is not right, really. You know, to be able to be a really successful business and to grow creatively, it's great to have that sounding board and that network of people that you can turn to. Yeah. And that give you that support.
Do you find that as well as being part of that group of helping other people, does that help you as well?
Really helps me. Yeah. I set my business up off the back of being in Be The Standard. I decided I wanted a business as well. I just don't want to be a presenter. I want to be a communications consultant. Yeah. How can I help other people? How can I use the skills I've got and turn that into a business? Yeah. And that purely came out of that group. In fact, it's somebody in that group who probably will never know who it is, but will remain nameless, actually asked me, could I do some coaching for someone in their business? And I'd never done that sort of coaching before. I'd been asked to do it many times, but I'd always said no. But because I really got on well with this person, I said, yeah, you know what, I'll do that for you. Yeah. And that was the beginning of my business. Yeah. So I'm forever thankful to that person.
That's mad, isn't it?
It's really mad.
And when you think, like, so if, because one of the things I was talking to our mutual friend about was when we think about products and how, like, there is those major shifts where a new product, we'll be thinking about a new product idea, and then we'll start to iterate, and then a new major thing will come along. And she'll say, "Oh, you need to talk to Jacey, and stuff." It's like, how do you see like the future? Like, have you got, I know you talked about aiming high and having things to be targeting for. So is that something that you've got like your own roadmap planned out, or is it more organic, or like what horizons are you sort of living or planning in at the moment?
I have realised that the goal for me is having balance in my life.
Yeah.
It's really important for me to be able to be a great mum and spend time with my children and spend time with my family, you know, while they're all still here. That's really important. I don't want to be somebody that's worked my fingers to the bone to the extent where I've made a massive sacrifice in my personal life. I want to have that balance.
Yeah.
And I think that I wanted to create a business, and I still want to create a business that allows me to have that flexibility. There might be a salary sacrifice for that, because there's always a sacrifice. I am absolutely committed to my business, because my business is fundamentally, that side of my business is about helping other people to overcome their fears. You know, like one of the things that really stuck in my head when I started creating the public speaker workshops that I now run for leaders was that 65% of the world's population have a massive fear of public speaking. And it's actually got its own term, glossophobia. Like that is an actual fear up there with agoraphobia and all of those kind of fears of spiders, arachnophobia. It's as high up as those things, and 65% of the world will experience that at some point. 10% of them will never overcome it and never be able to do it. And I just think if I can help some of those people in that band to be able to overcome their fears and step out of their comfort zones and to do something that they never thought that they could do, and to experience the buzz that I've experienced by being on live television and by doing those same sort of things, I think I'll do all right with that. That's the goal for me now. I guess to have balance, to spend time with my family is a massive goal, but also, you know, to be able to reflect back on my career and say, I did that. I created something out of nothing. You know, I didn't know that was how my career was going to end up. I thought I was always going to be on TV, but I actually pivoted and I created a business. I created that business out of nothing, out of my own skills.
And is the things when you look back, I mean, because we're again chatting to somebody else around there, if you can roll back 20 years, whatever, like, are there things that you now know that you would like advise either younger self or peers at the time? Because one of the ones mine definitely I've realised is, because one of the things I've struggled with in previous career is getting over myself, like putting yourself out there because you might get shot down. To be in the fear of, like, even I remember as a kid, like not wanting to go on an holiday with my dad, and they say, go and ask for an ice cream. Like, you know, French, whatever, and I wouldn't do it because I was embarrassed. You know, you can't get over yourself.
Self-consciousness,
but it being so inhibiting that you can't get there. And then something clicked in my brain. So what the kind of stuff, when you look at like Jacey today, is the things you would say to your younger self or somebody else, like do more of that or don't do that? Like other words of wisdom, or is it a case of just roll with it?
I would like to think that the biggest life lesson I've learned is to not worry so much. Don't sweat the small stuff, you know, because I think particularly when you're younger, you worry about stuff. 90% of the stuff you worry about never actually happens. And I think I would always want to remind myself that, you know, whatever seems like a huge problem right now, in a few months' time, probably won't really seem like a big deal at all. I think we all focus far too much on things that we can't change. And that's one thing that I've really had to learn to step away from, is allow myself to worry to a certain amount if something warrants my need to worry, but also learning when to put that to one side. And the other thing is, I think, well, I don't think I am. I've always been a perfectionist person. And I think if you are that way inclined and your personality is like that, you can be really hard on yourself. So I think I probably would say to my younger self, don't put that pressure on yourself, because nobody's perfect and nobody can ever be perfect. Perfect's a concept that just doesn't exist. And if that's your barometer, you'll always be disappointed because you'll never get there. So I think that would be my biggest advice. Stop worrying so much and don't try to be perfect.
Is there anything you've considered? So again, these are probably, it's with product head on, where we've thought some wild ideas. So, and then gone, oh, we're not going to go there. Like, no, that's one push too far, or that's a bit ridiculous. Has there been anything post BBC where you've, like, a thought has popped into your head Like, I might do that. And then you've gone, absolutely not, because of all these reasons. Or is it like, no, it's straight into communications. I knew what I was doing.
Do you know, that's a really difficult question to answer. I don't know, because it's still a book that I'm writing, you know, the end product is not finished. I mean, you know, one day I'd love to do a TED Talk. If I could one day do a TED Talk, that would be a life goal for me. I'd love to do a TED Talk about public speaking, communication, speech writing, something like that. Whether I'll ever do it, I don't know, because at the moment I'm building a brand and I'm building a business, and it's hard to see the end goal in sight. So there's nothing that's happened so far where I've kind of had regret. If anything, I'd say, you know, when you've worked for a big organisation, I was at the BBC for 20 years, you do get really institutionalised, and you don't realise until you step away. There's a whole world outside there. And I think, you know, I would always joke saying I've had more jobs than Barbie in my role at the BBC. I've been an undercover parking warden. I've trained as a firefighter in Liverpool. I've gone out with the police on drugs raids. I've been a dinosaur hunter out in the Badlands of Montana. I've flown over the tar sands in Canada in a helicopter. I have met American Indians, everything. You know, I've done the craziest stuff. And it's actually made me a really all-rounded person. And you know, I'm not seeking the thrill of that anymore. The thrills that I seek now are much more modest than they would have been back then. But what I would say is, you know, if you back yourself, you just don't know where you're going to end up. It's quite exciting, really. And the one thing that I wish I'd taken from my younger self into the stage I'm at now is, I think along the way you do lose that resolute self-belief a little bit. You know, like that, when I look back at that girl at the age of 18 that thought, actually, I'm doing a politics degree. I quite fancy working in Parliament. Actually, I quite fancy being an MP. I wonder if I could get to Congress. I wonder if I could be on TV doing a news report. You know, where has that girl gone? And I think we all lose that as we get older. I think that there's a naivety in youth that lots of young people have, and they have to embrace it, because that is the time you can create really radical change. And that's why when we are younger, we are so much more radical in our thinking. When we get older, there's more risk involved. You know, I can't just decide that I'm going to go and work for not that I would want to work for a president at the moment, but you know, I can't just make those decisions now because I'm a mum with 2 young kids. That
in the last couple of days, sort of the US and presidencies come up on various chats about it. It seems it's so topical.
You lose it.
I did hear a rumor that you were thinking about Pilates instructor. Is that just like a vicious rumor?
Well, that could be the next chapter, actually. I mean, when I did leave the BBC, my partner said to me, he went, you know what, if you're going to have a change or you fancy a change, do something you love. And you could almost see the cogs turning in my head. And I was like, I love Pilates. I do it 4 or 5 times a week. Wait a minute. I could be a Pilates instructor. I could be a Pilates influencer. And that was kind of in my head as a real thing that I might become. And then I realized that you had to do a lot of social media for that. You had to have hundreds of thousands of followers, and I barely ever put anything on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook or anything. I'm absolutely rubbish on social media. And then I had to talk myself down from the ledge and just kind of accept that maybe my own personal practice was as far as it was going to go.
That is brilliant.
I did see myself that I was going to become a Jedi Pilates instructor. Like, I wondered if I could do the splits, if I could do handstands, maybe I could do walking push-ups. I don't know. In the end, I did do a few of those training camps. It was a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. And now I'm quite happy with the 4 or 5 sessions I do a week.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. I keep going into my head, you know, like, this podcast could do one on mountain bikes. Love mountain bikes. Could be better. And then just reality just comes back.
You could be a mountain bike influencer.
Yeah.
You could be sponsored by all of those outdoor people.
You know, seriously, I'd love that.
That'd be amazing. Why don't you ask for some sponsorship now? You get your mountain bike sponsorship. Yeah. I'll get sponsored by, I don't know, Lululemon, something like that. I don't know.
Well, we were chatting. We had a little of... So when we get the grads and apprentices come in, we do a sort of like meet the leadership teamy things. And it was quite interesting because he said like, so what would you be if you weren't an Autotrader? And I'll be outside on my bike, like 24/7. The CFO was talking about, he keeps bees. I'd be out in the garden with the bees. And it's a bit where it's funny when all of a sudden you put real life.
Real life. I know. That's the problem. You've got to make a living, haven't you? And also, I realise it's quite labour intensive being a Pilates instructor. I'd have to do maybe 4 or 5 lessons a day. And, you know, after one, I've got to have a coffee and sometimes even a biscuit. So I'm not sure that's going to fly.
Yeah. No, that's been absolutely brilliant. So hopefully you'll come back. with like one of your sports colleagues and we'll
I'd
get a
love
car.
to.
So maybe that's a call out to rest of Autotrader. Can you get us a car and we'll get other people involved? That'd be brilliant. So I know we're out of time, and thanks for taking your time out of your busy schedule. Literally could sit here all day chatting Liverpool uni, like, you know, trying to work out what year you left, but I'm not going to go there. No, it's great. So thanks to those that tuned in and listening to this latest episode of Roadmap. Don't forget to like and subscribe on YouTube. Hit the notification button so you never miss another episode, and follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And that's us done and dusted. Cheers for that, Jacey.
You're very welcome.